Wow. When they get to Trenzler, the console room blew up so big it was like I was back on the Enterprise. I hope Star Trek fans get what I was on about with that. Heck with it, don't linger. Alright, folks. The name of the Doctor at the end of Series 7, nearly the end of Matt Smith's run. Boy, this has been a trip. So, this was one I was curious to see what my thoughts on it were going to be, because at the time that it aired, I liked it a lot. But a lot of that had to do with two things that I'm not going to say necessarily my opinions have changed on, but they have evolved. One was, it was very much sold at the time it aired on the promise of the War Doctor, of John Hurt. And while I, at least to my memory, Day of the Doctor is still pretty good, he is not necessarily the highlight of it. And at this point, having heard the War Doctor Big Finish series and being very underwhelmed by it, that promise doesn't carry as much weight now as it did at the time it aired. And the other thing was, at the time, I didn't really fully think about the complete implications of what they did with Clara. And I was kind of prepared to move on from them until stuff went on in the next series that really kind of made me go, oh, I should have realized what was going on here. But even with all that in place, I still think this is pretty good. I think this is solid in a number of areas. I think this is definitely one of the better stories that Jenny Strax and Vastra are in. I mentioned a couple episodes ago that as much as I like them as characters, they aren't in that many good stories. This is one of the better ones that they're in. It's nice to have River back. It feels appropriate, and I found myself thinking, do I buy it, the idea that after the Doctor sort of put her in the, or the memory of her, I guess, into the library computer, that he never went back and visited her? And I tried to think on that, and part of me wanted to go, that doesn't seem right, but then another part of me went, well, the thing is, and this was something that classic era Doctor Who just never really addressed, but modern era Doctor Who has established that the Doctor doesn't really go back for people once, they have their initial time with him. So, yeah, I suppose I do have to swallow that one. It is consistent. I don't love it, but it is consistent. I can't claim otherwise on that. Matt Smith does some great work here. He does a really good job with this sort of sense of dread and fear and regret that the Doctor is experiencing throughout pretty much this whole story. That's really good. There are a couple of logical leaps, like the random guy in Victorian era London. Why did he know anything about the Whispermen or the Doctor? Who was this guy? Why did he know? And I don't know. I feel like there might have been like a prequel thing that established why he knew stuff, but I didn't feel like digging it up. And it's the kind of thing that unless you go out of your way to ancillary things, it goes unanswered, if it's even answered there. I'm working off memory here on that. But I actually really, really, really like the Great Intelligence in this. I think this is a fantastic payoff for the Great Intelligence, especially as he's been depicted in the modern era. So there's a couple things I like about this. There's some things that I like in general concept. I think that if they were going to do this with any character at all, the Great Intelligence works for it, and ultimately it gets sold by Richard E. Grant's performance. So I like the idea. Okay, let me back up. There's a plenty of villains of all stripes who hate the Doctor. Whether it is complete races of people like the Daleks, whether it is individuals like the Master, lots of people have a lot of reasons to really hate the Doctor and to want him dead or to suffer. But the thing is, they pretty much always have other plans. And then the Doctor shows up and they're like, ooh, I'm going to kill him. But they have something else that they're working towards. And the Great Intelligence has had that up to this point. But where he comes in on this story, we realize that he has nothing left but spite. I like the idea that it's not just a matter of he's willing to let plans fall apart just to, take on the Doctor. But the idea is him succeeding involves him dying. And he's willing to pay that price to make the Doctor suffer. That level of hatred, of I can't even deal with the fact that you have stopped me over and over again anymore. That's it. I don't even care about everything else I was working towards. You are going down. And that is a concept that I like in general, but requires a core performance to sell it. And Richard E. Grant sells it. That scowl, that glower from him. Oh, that completely sells the loathing that this entity has for the Doctor. Totally buy it. Completely works. I really, really do like him. And I do think he's a part of this story that I don't think gets the credit he deserves. I think a surprising amount hinges on that performance selling that level of hatred. And I think he does do that. So, all right, let's talk about Clara. The first thing I'll say is, for the purposes of this story, the whole concept and what they're doing, it's kind of neat, right? I mean, it's a little weird and bonkers, but that's kind of nifty. The problem is, and this gets reiterated, unfortunately, multiple times in the next series, but we'll burn those bridges when we get to them. It starts this recurring theme of Clara basically being the single most amazing person or most meaningful person or most significant person the Doctor has ever known or ever traveled with. And just putting it broadly philosophically, I don't think any companion has any business being asserted by the show and by the text of the narrative to be that vital. Much like I don't think the Doctor should be the most important thing in the universe, I don't think any one companion should be the most important thing in his life. And this, combined with Listen, combined with Hellbent, really does create a recurring motif of Clara is the most important companion he will ever have. And it even starts with when she first shows up and this idea of all she did to endear herself to him was basically exist. She didn't have to do anything. He took her on board because she was a mystery. So already she's the most fascinating girl in existence. And now she's the most important because literally across his entire timeline, she kept saving him. Now, this is probably the least egregious of the episodes I've mentioned that have this going on in them. So we'll recur with this. But the thing is, the reason it's less egregious is because we're in a bit of a recursive time loop here, where there's an argument to be made that, even though Clara's words are, I've always been there, there's still an argument that you can make that she both was and wasn't always there. Because the only reason she was there was to maintain the timeline as it existed. So the Doctor still always did what the Doctor was always going to do. It's just she prevented all the damage or corrected all the damage that the Great Intelligence did. So even though she crops up across his entire history, saving him at every incarnation, it's not like the Doctor would have died without her. Like in the abstract. The Doctor would have died had she not prevented this guy who was messing with the timeline. So the Doctor still gets to have all his accomplishments, and they are still his. I don't know if what I'm saying is a little too mind-bending. Okay, let's bring it down to a specific example. The first Doctor getting in the TARDIS. Now, as presented, it makes it seem like the only reason he gets into the TARDIS that he does is because Clara tells him to. Except that through the nature of the time loop, there's an argument that he actually always did get in the correct TARDIS, and he was getting into the wrong TARDIS because of something the Great Intelligence did, and then Clara just corrected it. So what's the chicken and the egg? Did he get the TARDIS that he did only because of Clara, or did he always get the TARDIS that he did, and she just preserved that? I lean towards that one, especially because that's way more comfortable for me in terms of what I'm okay with going on in terms of her place and level of importance. So even though this plays into something that I hate, it's the later instances that really grind my gears. This one I can work with. And it was kind of nice to go back and rewatch it and realize, like, no, it's a little bit like how when I've said, and I even mentioned here, that I really don't like how the Doctor's importance just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and like he's like the savior of the universe, and the universe knows it. He's like the most powerful being, and he's a thing of legend across, like, how I hate that. You can go back to earlier reviews in the Overdue Doctor Who series and see me talk about things like the Pandorica Opens, or even before that with things like Silence in the Library and The Forest of the Dead, where there were moments where the Doctor did bank on his own reputation, but those moments worked for me. It was just later on, as it kept happening and got bigger and bigger further down the line, that it really bothered me. That's kind of where I am with this thing with Clara. Here, encapsulated in the name of the Doctor, I actually think it works, or at least it works well enough for me. It's what we're going to get later on that's really going to drive me up the wall. So I think that's pretty much everything that I had to say on this. Performances are solid. I have nitpicks on the script, but for the most part, it's pretty good. I think the idea of the TARDIS starting to break down and then the bigger on the inside leaks to the outside, that's kind of a cool idea. And overall, I think this is solid. The Whisper Men are sort of unnecessary. I mean, I guess to some degree they needed a physical threat from the Great Intelligence. I'm not sure it was that vital, but for the most part, this all works. It hangs together pretty well. And I was nervous to come back and rewatch it because I thought, since I know stuff is going to go on later that really bothers me, is this going to now fall apart? It doesn't. I still like this. So the name of the Doctor. That, my friends, is the end of Overdue Doctor Who, because this is the last episode of the modern era of Doctor Who that I did not already have a video up for. But fear not, because I'm going to continue the rewatch. Overdue Doctor Who, starting next week, will become Take 2 Doctor Who review, as I re-review episodes that I actually have already done reviews of previously. So, don't worry, we're still going through it. So, come on back and stick around. In the meantime, whatever your thoughts on the name of the Doctor, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Whole bunch of stuff to do. You know what it is. And until next time, this council is adjourned.